take into account.
And I'm sorry,
yes.
just to add, so we had a lot of discussion internally about that issue in the spread, and then the thing to keep in mind is because we're using this sort of as a planning tool to help with some relative kind of prioritization, understanding the variability, we felt we can live with that given how we're proposing to use the data in sort of a relative prioritization versus like we're not using this to set any sort of regulatory target or establish, you know, performance of a site per se. So I think part of the answer to that question is what the output of the model will be used for. Right?
And then way before all those questions, Kevin O'Connor asked if you'll be running the model using CRAM as well.
Yes. And we do intend to do that as a next step. To address Jim and Terrence's questions, I don't have the RMSE R-squared values in this presentation today, but I'd be more than happy to share our statistical output and results with the group. So I can send those along to Anna in tabular format and share them as well. I'd be happy to. And then it looks like Kate had a question. Since this is an index and not a continuous variable, has it been tested on extreme index values that don't scale like regular numbers? Yes, so that's an excellent question, and one maybe we should, that might also be a question to take offline. But yes, Kate, I'd be happy to talk about that with you further. And I think that would also sort of bring up some things that have been considered using the SQI as well, since a lot of the work that we're doing today and that I'm presenting today is based on that approach. Eric, did you want to add anything to any of those considerations?
No, the one thing I might add, going back to Kevin's question on the CRAM, we've talked internally that we're going to try this approach not only at the CRAM index level, but at the attribute score level as well, because we know that the CRAM attributes behave a little bit differently in terms of kind of what they're looking at in the stream. So we'll try it for each of the 4 CRAM attributes independently as well.
Hey, Eric, on that kind of along the same lines, is that something where IPI would be considered, or if not, why was CRAM chosen over IPI? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, we could potentially try with IPI. I mean, we typically think of the IPI a little bit more as a stressor measure than as a condition measure, and I think that's the main reason why, you know, admittedly, CRAM has a little bit of elements of both, as do many tools, but I think that's really, Ali, the main reason was we think of the IPI data more as stressor data than condition data, but it's definitely something. Okay. None of this is set in stone. We're sort of still in the development process, so we can definitely explore whether that would make sense to try to go down that road.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Fantastic. Well, I'm excited about the discussion that this is engendering. So if anybody wants to reach out to me personally after this, I'd be happy to talk about this further. But as I mentioned, I'll certainly share additional model validation and statistics and results with the group, and then we can continue to sort of mull on this going forward. All right, so if you would go to the next slide. So in thinking about how we then interpret these predicted biotic indices, our first approach is thinking about this from essentially grouping them into various condition levels. And this is an approach somewhat similar to, again, what the stream quality index or the SQI did. But essentially what we're doing is we're comparing our predicted values to various index thresholds that exist at reference sites. So we have chosen the 1st, 10th, and 30th percentiles to essentially group them into these condition levels that vary from very likely altered to likely unaltered. And you'll see this sort of coloration continue on in the presentation. But what this essentially means is for ASCII, we're comparing it to the values you see here, which are indicative of the 1st, 10th, and 30th percentiles at reference sites. And then similar for CSCI, we're comparing them to those particular values. So we're taking our predicted biotic indices as a result of these random forest models and comparing them to the values you see here to essentially classify them based on these condition levels. So from a high level, the approach that we're using allows us to essentially go from what you see on the left. So here we have just points, stream reaches that have been sampled, and then we can assign them various conditions, but only at those particular locations. And we've just chosen the Ventura River watershed as an example here. And then next slide. And then with this random forest modeling technique, we're then able to extrapolate to a larger scale. So we're able to go from distinct sampling points up to the watershed and larger scale, but use that same condition classification. And then we are able to extrapolate that to the statewide scale as well. So here I'm providing you with a map of the statewide ASCII results. So those are the predicted ASCII scores as a result of our random forest modeling. Next slide. And then also the statewide CSCI results. So here we're employing the same condition classification. So things you see in red are very likely altered. Things in pink are likely altered. And then we have light blue denoting possibly altered. And then the darkest blue is likely unaltered, so in sort of the best condition. And again, these condition classifications are comparing predicted random forest model results to those percentiles for reference sites. So once we have demonstrated that we're able to successfully and confidently extrapolate these indices at larger scales up to the statewide scale, our next challenge is to think about how best to synthesize these different indices into an overall assessment. So I have a couple thoughts on how we might go forward with doing this today, but I'd be really interested to get your thoughts and comments on how best we might be able to achieve this. So the first option that I wanted to present today is potentially adopting a sort of binary classification system. So we could consider streams that are classified as either very likely altered or likely altered in their condition as requiring restoration or action. And this sort of binary classification, we could weight ASCII predictions more heavily or CSCI, or if folks feel strongly that we should be weighting them equally, we could integrate essentially and consider both sets of predictions equally. So if you go to the next slide, if we think about this from a mapping standpoint, just to give you an idea of what this would mean spatially in terms of what stream reaches we'd be considering, if we take this sort of binary approach, the first panel here is showing the stream reaches that would then require or suggest they would require some sort of restoration action based on ASCII scores alone, again, predicted ASCII scores. The next panel shows which stream reaches suggest restoration or management action based on CSCI scores alone. And then if we were to consider them equally, then this final panel shows how we might, which stream reaches suggest that they should be restored based on equally weighting ASCII and CSCI scores. So I'll stop here for a moment. If folks have any questions or comments, it looks like there's a few things that have come through in the chat. So Terrence asked, how was the desert modeled? So the desert was modeled in the same way that the remainder of the state was. So we used stream cap parameters that existed for given stream reaches, for given COM IDs, and then modeled ASCII and CSCI scores in the same way that the other PSA regions were modeled.
Can I just jump in real quick?
Yes, Terry, I can anticipate your question, but go ahead.
Yeah, when we did the Healthy Watershed Initiative, we had no biological data in those areas. And so it seems like it must be purely on physical factors rather than any biological factors. Right.
Yeah, so we and this is maybe a discussion for the group, right? So we could, until we have sort of a fully developed ephemeral stream tool, one option like we did in the Healthy Watersheds Initiative project is we grade out certain areas of the state where we felt that the condition indices are not applicable. Now this may be less so for CRAM when we get to the CRAM piece, but that's an option. I mean, that's definitely something we can discuss with the group. This model is sort of basically saying we're relating condition to sort of the landscape. And so the assumption is that the landscape drivers or the landscape variables in StreamCat are going to sort of have a similar sort of effect on condition, even if the assessment tool, right, isn't the same. You're sort of saying, well, the effect of the landscape drivers on the streams is comparable, even if the assessment tool isn't the same. So the discussion for the group would be, is that a valid enough assumption that we can go ahead and extrapolate the condition scores across the drainage network in terms of these 4 categories Haley showed, or should we consider graying out areas of the state where we know the CSCI and ASCI doesn't apply, and maybe just focusing on the CRAM model for those portions of the state? Again, that's a topic I think we'd love to get some feedback and input on.
Yeah, and just to add to that, Terrence, to get into the really nitty gritty, when we did look at the sort of model validation for the different regions, the desert in particular performed fairly well when predicting CSCI scores, but not quite as well with ASCII. So that's definitely a region that is one we're thinking about in terms of applying this model appropriately.
What do you think, Terry? What would you do?
Well, I'm having trouble understanding, the concept of restoration in the desert.
Yeah.
And so it just seems like maybe it's best to cut it out.
Mm-hmm. So
my thought.
Yeah. And then maybe once we get through the second part, when we think about what sort of restoration or management actions we're contemplating, we can circle back to that, because I think we can definitely gray it out like we did in the previous work. That's really up to sort of discussion by the group. So I'd love to, maybe we can continue this discussion a little bit more down the road.
And I think Aaron made a good comment. The correlation between altered and terrain slope valley width is striking. Streams are altered where people essentially live or develop. Yes, there's a very striking correlation there. And speaking of correlation, Jim also makes a good point. How correlated are the CSCI and ASCII predictions? Their degree of covariance may determine how you consider them in tandem. Yes, that's certainly a consideration. So as we move forward, again, this was sort of the exploratory stages, but as we go forward, we do want to think critically about how to integrate them. The SQI essentially integrated ASCII and CSCI into a larger biotic, integrated biotic index. But if high rates of correlation are of concern, there are certainly other approaches that we can take.
And just to build on that, I mean, as many on the call know, we've definitely looked at that issue through the PSA and through the SMC data sets in Southern California, right? And the quick answer to that question is, not surprisingly, they tend to be sort of highly correlated at the end, at the extremes, and you get a little more deviation in the middle, where you tend to get, in the mid ranges, more cases where things will be good for the CSCI and bad for the ASCII, or vice versa. So they are, in the big picture, correlated, but the amount of correlation varies over the gradient, of disturbance from low to high. So, and that's, there's actually some really great graphics in some of the integrated reports and the PSA and SMC reports that show that.
And to address Phil's question about having sort of equivalent faith in both indices, to address your comment about the ASCII being somewhat problematic, we do, for this particular modeling, we used the diatom portion of the ASCII, but I do recognize that there's also the soft-bodied algae, and so if folks feel more confident, I guess, in using the sort of more integrated approach for ASCII, that's also another direction we could pursue. But for our purposes today, I did approach them with sort of equivalent or equal faith in thinking about sort of integrating and applying them. Eric, I wasn't sure if you wanted to address Susan's question, if in terms of how we might compare water board priorities to this assessment of altered waters.
Yeah, so I can't see the chat, but I think that would come as we get, if you recall back to, if I understand the question correctly, and you can correct me if I don't, but if we think back to the larger sort of overview I gave, I think that we have this, condition and then kind of the stress management. And then the last piece is what we call opportunity. And I think that's the piece where we would want to come in if you're working in specific waters. So it could be at a larger scale, regional scale, or at a watershed scale, and sort of in a sense overlay priorities that have been identified through other programs. And that would, in a sense, be considered in sort of the ranking process within a watershed. So if you're trying to rank certain areas in terms of priority for certain actions, we would definitely want to take into account other programs that have already gone through a prioritization process within that watershed and not discount that. So I think we would bring it in under that third part of the analysis. I'm not sure if I answered the question or not.
And Kevin, I'll take a note on, thank you for letting me know that John Olson has that data. So I'll note that for future potential use. Great. Keep the comments and questions coming. Are there any others before we move on?
I think there was one about, is the restoration on this site equivalent to impacted? So just that.
Yeah, that's
projects or grant projects, right? So I think that, yeah.
Sorry, that was me, Josh. I just wasn't.
Right, I think I'm talking and I don't
understanding. I wasn't entirely clear. The slide that we're looking at that says, restore based on ASCII, restore based on CSCI, restore based on both. Is that strictly looking at basically these are the sites that are impacted based on one, the other, or both? Or is this actually running through at least the straw man approach of this tool to say, here are the factors that might be restorable? So for example, I'm looking at the South Coast, and a bunch of those are probably concrete channels, which by some metrics would rank very low on a restoration scale, since it would be very cost prohibitive. And I was just trying to get clarification on that. Thank you.
Yeah, so Eric, maybe you can chime in here as well. But I would say roughly, yes, we were thinking of the sites in this case are the ones that fall in the sort of light pink or the red, so impacted in terms of the condition classifications we've been using.
Right, that's right. So yeah, Josh, this is just a demonstration. All Haley's done is she's taken any of the stream reaches that were scored very likely altered or likely altered, so in the red and the pink, and she just lumped those into, those are altered, so they're candidates for, think of it as candidates for restoration. We've not gone through any of the subsequent analysis yet in terms of looking at stressors and opportunities. That's all coming next. This is just intended to demonstrate this concept of how you might get similar or different results if you did that sort of lumping based on ASCII alone, CSCI alone, or both of them together. So, so it hasn't, let's just think of it as a candidate for restoration more than anything. Does that answer your question, Josh?
That's outstanding clarification. Thank you.
Okay.
Fantastic. Okay, I think we can go to the next slide. So as I anticipated, there's a lot of discussion about, an integration approach that might be a little bit more nuanced than just a simple, addition or multiplication. So another option we might have is to adopt a sort of integrated index with logic similar to that of the stream quality index. So if you want to go to the next slide, I presented what sort of an index that might look like. So if we're thinking about doing a more scaling approach, I've presented the ASCII bins, if you want to think of them that way, along the top there, and then the CSCI bins along the left. And then we might be able to use a sort of an integrated index to generate an overall score. So this is another potential approach that we could use. And the scoring that I've used here is almost identical to the one used in the SQI. But the nice part about this sort of an approach is we can also tailor it based on if we want to weight the CSCI or the ASCII differently, and even more specifically, if we want to weight really high performing or really low performing scores in a certain way. So we could expand the sort of dark red or sort of very, very likely altered region you see there, or expand the likely unaltered section you see up in the blue. So this sort of an approach allows for a little bit more customization or added nuance, if you want to think of it that way. Do folks have any questions or thoughts on that sort of an approach as opposed to the more binary binning that was proposed in the first option?
Yeah, this is a point we'd love to get some feedback on, like what the group thinks in terms of a way to proceed.
And again, eventually this would also, oh, go ahead.
I was just wondering how this looks visually on the map. I mean, is it visually different, very different looking when you run this through for the state? As far as if you were to pick out the pink and the red and call it restoration areas, how different is that from your previous slide?
So it's not particularly different because right now, the way that I presented it here, the pink and the red are still those sort of bottom two categories based on the percentile binning that we're doing. But that could certainly change based on how things are weighted. So if we chose to either weight the ASCII or the CSCI differently, or consider different bins more heavily, then that would certainly change the map. As this particular coloration or weighting, I guess you could say this logic is presented, these maps appear very similar to the ones I just presented.
Okay. And just to be clear, the previous one was just an average of the two, right? Okay.
Correct.
I like the opportunity here more for changing your bins if needed, and yeah.
And one of the things that we can do also, Kevin, is we can, again, since we're early on, we'll probably maybe do like what amounts to a little bit of a sensitivity analysis, keeping in mind that one of our objectives, in a sense, is we want to be able to differentiate sites, right? And so one of the things that we're interested in, any tool for this type of planning purpose, if it doesn't do a good job of helping us sort sites, like everything tends to wind up in one bin or another, then it's not as useful for us. And so one of the things that we'll probably test is, just from a sensitivity perspective, if we play with some of these weightings, what we really want to get is the ability to differentiate sites well in a meaningful way so that it actually really helps us with the prioritization process.
Yeah. And if you guys are potentially adding in a third metric, I don't know if CRAM will be integrated with ASCI, CSCI, or if it'll be completely separate. But if you add in a third axis, that will really will complicate things, but it'll have you a three-dimensional figure
Right.
here.
Exactly.
Right. Blue yep. to red, which will be really interesting. But as Terry said, this is definitely the most transparent, which I agree. You can actually see what's going on here. And
yeah,
I support this one.
Yeah, and with the addition of CRAM, there's certainly a lot of possibilities. I think as the SQI currently does it, it has ASCII and CSCI in this sort of biological integrated index, and CRAM's considered somewhat separately, and then they're integrated into this sort of super integrated index. But there's certainly different ways that we could do it here. There was also a question that came through. Elijah, would you be willing to elaborate a little bit on that? I'm not sure if I've heard of a fuzzy inference system approach, and I'd be curious to learn more about what you meant by using that as an integration technique.
Yeah, and I admittedly don't know all the sort of ins and outs of how it works or how to develop it, and I apologize if I missed something earlier while you were talking, but what came to mind to me is just, it's a quantitative way to integrate sort of different types of data to then end up at a particular category, and you can build the system to have as many categories as you want, and then it essentially uses this sort of center of mass to put a particular object into a particular class, and it's just, again, a very transparent way to do it, where you build the categories and you say essentially what determines membership, and then you can show how each individual object gets put into that category. But it can also be something that you develop with stakeholder feedback as well, similar to what you're doing now.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I think, and Terry may know this better than I do, I think that's part of, like, when we've done some of the biological condition gradient, the BCG work, that sort of kind of fuzzy logic approach has been used to help with some of the binning into the 6 BCG categories. And so there's definitely some precedent for using that in this type of application. So it's a really interesting suggestion, Elijah, that we can probably explore that a little bit and see how it would work here.
Thanks, Eric.
Yeah.
Great. And Jim, I'm making a note of your suggestion as well. So these are all good suggestions and options for ways that we might be able to confidently integrate all 3 of these indices going forward. Wonderful. So I'd be happy to, as folks sort of mull this over and think about how best to go forward, if you have any other thoughts or ideas or comments on how you think it might be most helpful for you and stakeholders to apply these and integrate these indices, please let me know. In our next steps will be, as I mentioned, continuing our random forest modeling with our CRAM, or California Rapid Assessment Method scores, and validating those models to make sure that we feel they're confidently doing as good of a job as the models for the ASCII and the CSCI. And then we'll be working on thinking about how best to integrate these 3. So if all goes well with the modeling with CRAM, then we'll be integrating ASCII, CSCI, and CRAM together, and thinking about how we can use those to best identify sites and prioritize them for restoration activity. And I'll take any additional questions, or if anyone has any additional comments, feel free to raise your hand or type them in the chat.
So this is Sue Keitel with EPA, and I apologize I missed the introduction, but just looking at the second bullet where we're talking about using the approach to prioritize sites in need of restoration, we've already discussed that this is really just identifying altered water bodies, and I think that language will be important. And I raise that because there's 2 things. You can restore impaired waters, or you can protect threatened and high quality waters. And I'm wondering if this tool could also be used to identify waters that need protection if they're threatened. So just that language refinement might allow both approaches.
Yeah, I'm sorry, that was something we actually covered at the very beginning. So it is definitely, and Jeff will touch on this a little bit more in his part, we have protection, restoration, and management categories. And so our sort of high level goal is to sort of at the beginning use the condition assessment to put things into sort of candidates for protection, candidates for restoration, candidates for management, and obviously there's some overlap on restoration and management. And then proceed with more specific recommendations from there. So definitely protection is a big part of the analysis.
Thank you, and sorry I missed the beginning.
No worries, no worries. Okay. Any other questions for Haley before we move to the next section?
Just to ditto a comment that this is super exciting work. So thank you.
Thanks, Terry. Yeah, so and I think that this is what Haley showed. We're really hoping, and we've been working with Anna on this to find ways to basically build, as we build out these models, incorporate them into the statewide efforts of the Healthy Watersheds Partnership. So.
And thank you all for your engagement today. I really appreciate it, and keep the questions coming. So feel free to contact me if you're interested in learning more. Thanks.
Yeah. We'll put Haley's email will be at the end. So. All right. So with that, the last part of our presentation that Jeff will cover is, most of what Haley has talked about has been on the condition piece, and how do we kind of extrapolate and do this kind of assignment based on condition. And so we're going to transition into the next part, which is on the stressor management piece, and how do we begin to identify stressors and the associated management actions and kind of pair them with individual stream reaches. And so Jeff will walk you through what we've done to date on that part. So Jeff, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you.
Thanks. You've seen this before. This is the overall matrix of management, condition, and vulnerability in order to guide what management actions are probably the highest priority. Haley gave a great presentation on the condition piece, and I'll be talking on the stressor piece. And in terms of stressors, we're talking about physical things like dams and culverts, things like that, hydrological alterations from things like urbanization. There's also chemical stressors from things like agriculture. So we're looking at a full suite of potential stressors. If you can go on to the next question. Yeah, so the broad questions that we had and were wanting to bring to you was specifically the types of stressors, the thresholds involved, whether we have the right management actions, and how to match the stressors and the management actions. To help with this discussion, we sent you all a survey in order to help guide this discussion. If you can go on to the next slide. Yeah, so we had 8 questions in the survey, 17 participants. Thank you very much, guys and ladies. And we had 2 to 16 participants per question. And the first question, if you can go on to the next one. Yeah, the first question was about, do we have the right stressors? And we selected these based on, we thought they were relevant. We thought that they represented a wide range of stress. The data for these were readily available on the web through Streamcat. And there were thresholds available in the literature in order to evaluate whether there was a problem or not. So the next slide, please. So we had 15 participants give us some suggestions, and we had 18 different stressors that were suggested. All of them were relevant to stream condition. The N, some of them you can see an N next to the stressor, and that indicates that there was more than one participant that responded in that way. Most of these were new stressors that that we will consider incorporating in our model. But we did see there were some of the indicators that we thought that were redundant with mostly urbanization as what we already had. So you can go on to the next slide. The next question was, would you change any of the thresholds? And we had one person respond with actual values that they thought maybe we could tweak some of the thresholds. And we also had a response about the thresholds are probably watershed specific, and we may get there eventually, but in this beginning part of the survey of the study, we are mostly focusing on set thresholds for the entire watershed, or entire across watersheds, I should say. So,
and Jeff, you might comment real briefly on where these numbers originally were derived from.
Yeah, Betty Fetcher, her paper on the development of the algae IBI. That's where the stressors and the thresholds also came from, and Rafi's paper as well on the CSCI. He incorporated these and had I think a couple of refinements to the numbers.
I think the point is that we're trying to these are sort of consistent with thresholds that have been used in the development of the biological indices that Haley mentioned. So there is, we didn't just sort of make these up, right? So they came through that process and had discussion, and the numbers were arrived through a process of consideration by the technical advisory groups that worked on those indices.
Hey, Eric, can you comment on the 50% threshold for intermediate? That seems extreme.
For talking about code 21?
Where do you see the codes?
Or the pipes and canals was the other one that had 50%.
No, I'm talking about urbanization at the 5 kilometer, greater than 50%. Okay. That seems really high.
So yeah, I think we can change that, Terry. I think, again, we just started. That's sort of why we put the survey out. We started with the thresholds that were in some of those earlier papers as a starting point, but for sure, these are all subject to change if we think they're not appropriate. So we can definitely flag that and maybe play around with some different options to see again how it helps with the decision-making process.
And also just for those who aren't monitoring the chat actively, I've added a link to the survey just in case you are listening in and say, hey, I wish I could have contributed, but it's too late. Guess what? It's not too late. We'd love your feedback. So it's in there if you haven't already taken it.
And I guess thanks, Anna. And the other thing that maybe, Terry, is a good point that you bring up is that in those previous papers on the development of the CSCI and the algal index, the goal was really to identify reference from non-reference, right? Because that was kind of where a lot of those thresholds were originally developed. And so I think there's a much less confidence in the thresholds for the intermediate. And so I think there's definitely a lot of opportunity to kind of revisit some of the intermediate thresholds across the board.
So this is Sue with EPA. And again, apologies if I just am behind the 8 ball. I look at ag and it captures so many different kinds of ag. And I'm wondering how you break that out from rangeland grazing to very dense row crops to cattle, confined animals, and how that's all captured in something that's rolled up like this.
Yeah, in StreamCat, it's broken out into row crops versus, I think, hay is is the other component to it, and I combine those to create percent ag. There wasn't in StreamCat. I don't believe there was a grazing component, so that unfortunately was left out.
And how about confined animal facilities?
Yeah, that wasn't in StreamCat either. I was going for things that were readily available on the back end, adding things adding things on a condition by condition, on a watershed by watershed basis. I'll get to that later, but we can certainly add those. But I wanted to have a list of things that were readily available to anybody that was interested in using the assessment tool.
Yeah. And so just to elaborate on what Jeff was saying, and the preview, he'll talk about this more in a few slides, but I think one of the things we're thinking about is to have sort of one set of stressors that we can get from StreamCat that could be applied sort of universally across the state based on StreamCat. And then in that matrix, and Jeff will show you some more examples of the matrix in a few slides, is to add in some of these more specific stressors like confined animal feed lots or other things like, and those might be things that if you have the data available at the within the watershed that you're working in, then there would be kind of a structure in there to account for that. But if you don't have that data available in your specific watershed, you could collapse back to the higher level category. And that's a very similar approach to what is done in the EPA RPS tool, where the recovery potential screening tool, where they have kind of this kind of nested approach, and you can collapse back to coarser levels if you don't have the finer data within your watershed. And so I think we're sort of envisioning a similar type of approach to allow the accommodation of better data at the watershed scale if it's available.
Okay, I think we're ready for the next.
Patricia Bratcher just left a note in the chat that you guys can go back to later about data that she has on above and below illegal grows. So potential partnership there.
That'd be great. You want me to go on, Jeff? Next slide.
Yes, please. So the third question was, are there any of our stressors that were lower priority? And as you can see on the right-hand side, the number of responders that believe that that some of these stressors were probably not priority. So combining percent ag and urban, producer mines, those got the most attention. So this is the consolidated list of stressors. The first few are the ones that we came up with, and then the bottom ones are the ones that we got from the survey. You can see the number of participant support for each one. And the last column was about whether the data are readily available. And outside of StreamCat, it would be great if we can get some input on where we can get the data for the ones that you thought that were important.
Yeah.
Both data sources as well as, if you have them, thresholds. That'd be awesome.
Yeah. And then on that second note, particularly with the thresholds, if you have suggested thresholds, again, we can build that into the structure and sort of leave it blank at the statewide scale, but have a structure in place that if the data is available at a watershed scale or regional scale, you could drop that in, and with the designated thresholds, you could then incorporate it.
Susan asks if forestry or timber harvest is included.
It should be. It should be on the list. It was on the list of, maybe it got left off on the bottom. Yeah, it must have gotten left off. Yeah, it was definitely one of the ones that one of the responses we received.
Yeah, might have gotten chopped off when we shrunk it, the slide down.
Yeah. Okay. I think we're ready for the next slide. So question 4 was about the co-occurrence of multiple stressors and how we should handle that. And you can see for the most part, the greatest response was to integrate the contribution of the multiple stressors. And the next highest was some way of ranking them. In fact, I think some of the ones that were submitted through the survey are themes on these two things, integrating or ranking. So next slide, thank you. So I just wanted to take a time right here talking about the stressors, just to pause and get some feedback, just to do a recap and get some feedback. So basically the two-tiered approach to the stressors, we use a statewide analysis to focus on the stressors available through StreamCat, as Eric had mentioned, and then provide the management relationship for stressors basically on a local scale to allow the integration or incorporation of additional stressors as the manager sees fit. So were there any additional thoughts on the stressors, the ones that we were proposing, the ones that were suggested, thresholds, or anything like that before I move on into the management portion?
There's nothing in the chat yet.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Hey, Jeff, I couldn't get the chat fast enough, so I thought I would just speak. You talked about, the types of stressors, but I didn't really hear how that gets integrated into the overall model.
Yeah, that's the next portion.
That's coming next.
That's coming up.
Okay.
And thank you for that cue. Any other thoughts on the stressor portion? Okay, I guess we're ready to move on. So the fifth question we had was about the management actions that we had on our list. And as you can see, this is our list. We divided up into those that were protection or some type of preservation would be the most prudent way of going about it. And with broader categories under that, restoration potential, as well as things that could probably fit in either a protection or a restoration. We call those just overall management strategies. And these are pretty broad categories that we included. For instance, water quality management would include things like BMPs. Physical rehabilitation would include things like dam removal or levee control. So go on to the next slide, please. And these are the management actions that were suggested by the survey. I put these into what I thought were the best management action type category, and indicated whether it looked like some of these were redundant with the strategies that we were already planning. Like I said, our strategy were broader categories, and some of the actions that were suggested were just greater detail. For instance, removing dams would fit under the physical rehabilitation of the stream and floodplain. But there were some that, like education and temperature management, that we will definitely consider incorporating into the strategy.
And here's another place, again, we're sort of, this is evolving, but there's options for like almost like an expanded. So again, we might roll some of these up, and then in application, you could sort of expand the list to more specifics. Because again, the idea is to have a set that we can apply somewhat universally across the state. So those are things we're interested in, kind of finding the right balance between statewide applicability, utility of the tool, and specificity. So we're really interested in your help in terms of how to find that right balance.
So the sixth question was about the priority of the management actions, and for the most part, people were pretty. They felt okay with the actions that we had. There was some discussion on just talking about situationally dependent, whether you need to consider the actions on a case-by-case basis. So next slide. Yeah, a little hard to see. This is the matrix of potential management action and the stressors. Yeah, to get everything in this table, it's not coming out as clearly as we had hoped. But hey, the X's indicate whether there was a relationship between stress and the action, and the highlighted ones are the priority actions that would probably be the higher priority management actions in order to deal with the stress. Okay, next slide. And this is the input that we got from the participants. The light blue are the ones that people thought were ones that we missed that would apply to the relationship between management action and the stressors, and the dark blue are the ones that they thought were a priority. So we picked up a few.
Yeah. And so our next step on this is, this is kind of, in a sense, think of this as a prototype. We need to now go back and refine the list of stressors in terms of the row headings, and refine the list of management actions based on your input in the column headings. And then, but the idea is we're trying to relate stressors to management so that we can begin to say, okay, if you're trying to pursue a restoration action, which of the restoration actions, what might be the priority that you might consider for a given stream reach based on the stressors that are acting on it. And so it's kind of just to sort of answer Terry's question, it's really just a simple kind of aligning type of process. And then Jeff will talk next about then how do we sort of combine all of this, right? So, but that's the general. So think of this as kind of a prototype, and based on the input we got from the survey and continued input, we'll sort of build this out into a bigger matrix that we can not fit on a single slide, but can make available. So.
And then just before y'all jump forward, Ben King asks, where would management actions like on-farm recharge or planting cover crops to promote rainfall fit in?
So what was the first one? The second one, the planting cover crops, we have a category that's what we call sort of catchment scale sediment management, and sort of that's probably where I might put that, but maybe that's not the right place for it.
Yeah, and replanting, we've got the revegetation of the riparian zone.
This is Sue again. Is there also a catchment scale for things other than sediment, like nitrogen and things like that the water boards are working so hard on addressing?
So we have a catchment preservation, which we could expand out, which is really designed to, we have in the protection category, right, which is, but it could go, we could add, if in terms of like other categories like restoration management, so we have catchment preservation, we have runoff management, and we have water quality management. And so those are things maybe we can build some more detail out in terms of those aspects to deal with watershed-based solutions to some of these problems.
And could you just speak a little bit to how or if you have looked at the that are required through different programs, whether it's, irrigated land permits or NRCS management measures, practices that they promote, to just see how you've tried to crosswalk all those other programs that do this?
We haven't crosswalked it with those others, but I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, we pulled in some of those into the opportunities category, or we're looking at them as areas where we definitely would be able to. TMDL was another one that that we would be considering in the overall scheme.
Yeah, but I like the suggestion of pulling in those lists of existing recommended management measures and sort of checking them against our list to make sure that they're at least represented in our master list. So that's a great suggestion.
I'll add to it the state's non-point source 5-year plan that is where they've highlighted the program topics that they have identified as priorities to implement high priority TMDLs and things in the next 5 years.
Perfect. I wrote that down. Great. Thank you.
Thanks. So the last question was about the interactions of stress and management, and when we had multiple interactions, how should we address them? And for the most part, people wanted something that we would we would address them without combining. And I think the idea here was people wanted the maximum amount of flexibility, so they wouldn't get pigeonholed into an action that they didn't think that was correct. It sounds like it's more of a watershed by watershed basis and stressor issue, that the maximum flexibility in order to have the most appropriate management action. And then the second most popular response was about ranking, and actually the ranking and the multiple options are not mutually exclusive, so both of those can be incorporated in our plan. The rest of the ones that people had provided seem to be either a theme on the ranking or about optimizing between maximum effect and the cost involved. So good suggestions from the group. And I think the next slide, yeah. So overall, it appears that the strategy is something that will work, taking a look at the prioritizing the management actions based on condition and the stressors. The list of stressors were the ones that we had tried to find that were most readily available in the literature and are online, but additional stressors are things that we will incorporate and include as suggestions for on a watershed by watershed basis. Exploring the idea of integrated stressor index, that was by and large the major suggestion that people had on that question. Again, people wanted the flexibility in order to consider multiple potential stressor management action interactions. So I once again, I thank you for participating in the survey, those that you did. The survey is still open, so we would still value your input. And I think at this point, I'd like to open up the any suggestions on the overall strategy, either the stressors, the management actions. Looks like Terry's got a question.
Yeah, it probably represents my confusion, so I apologize. So let me just try to frame the entire discussion, right? So the first part was about the overall tool. Then we talked about, taking the biological indices and, extrapolating within the watershed. And then we developed a list of basically map-based stressors primarily, right?
Right.
And so that's where my disconnect comes in, because generally the map-based stressors are things that are harder to fix, right? Because they're long-term, they're in the map, and so that's the confusion I'm having, right? It's hard to fix percent imperviousness, right? So there's very little in terms of management you can do to fix that, other than a bunch of LID. So anyway, that's the mismatch in my confusion, right? The ability to take actions on things that are basically map-based and more solid.
Yeah, so I think that's a good question, Terry. I think the thought process is, again, we're starting by, if you go back to the as you said, the condition, the first step is we want to try to essentially kind of bin these sites into, areas that are in good condition. So we want to protect them, and areas maybe that are not so good condition, and we want to restore. And then there's a management piece. So we're sort of putting them into these categories. And once you're into like the protection piece, we would use the map base to say, are there things in the catchment that would suggest that they're maybe at risk, like they're in good condition now, but we have things in the catchment that would suggest that we know those are stressors, so maybe the stream hasn't reacted yet. And so what are the things you might do to protect the stream in terms of buffers or protecting, re-vegging upland areas that have been grazed and things like that. And then similarly in the restoration, if we know that, say, they're in that category of low CSCI and ASCI or CRAM scores, what is it and so you have to decide, what do you want to do now? Do you want to, and we know there's always lots of multiple stresses. And so we're trying to say, okay, if you are going to do something, what should you do? Should you, buffer the stream? Should you focus on, runoff control? Should you focus on removing a dam? And so, I think we think of this as kind of like a planning level as a starting point. What are some of the priority management actions you might think of, and and then in the last piece, how do you rank those in terms of most to least important, so that if you're going into a watershed to try to sort of fix the watershed, think about what to do where and in what order in order to be most impactful. So that's kind of the concept. And so, but I think we're really open to additional suggestions in terms of if there's a better way to get at that, keeping in mind that we're trying to get out of the box of sort of we know there's a lot of watershed by watershed based programs out there, lots of work in the individual watersheds, and that's where the opportunity piece comes in to sort of bring those plans to bear on this. But what we're trying to do is provide something at a larger scale that if there are not watershed plans, you could use this as a starting point, or even where there are watershed plans, at least gives you sort of that first step that you can kind of do at a broad scale fairly easily, online, and then kind of crosswalk that with the local watershed management plans.
Yeah, I get that, but a lot of those same things that you used were identified as constraints
Mhm.
in the development of the CSCI and the ASCII, right?
Yeah.
And now we're talking about them as if they're not constraints. And so that's the disconnect I have in my brain.
Yeah, I see the disconnect. I'm not sure if I would call them constraints per se, right? Because I think clearly we're making inferences based on what's mapped in StreamCat and what are the associated things you can do to remedy some of those. But do you have? So I see the disconnect. Do you have a suggestion on a different way to approach it, or?
Well, that's why I asked about the end product. So is the end product, here's your watershed, here's the, extrapolated condition, and here's the types of stressors that there are. And so is it more like a diagnostic tool?
Yeah, well, I think it's that, and I think it's the next step that we're trying to take is if you think of a watershed map, and so what you just said is correct, and then the last step would say you can go look at your watershed map, and we might color code or attribute different reaches based on, say, think of being able to click on a stream reach and getting 2 or 3 of the top recommended management responses for that portion of the watershed. So you might say, I have a map now of my watershed showing this reach is impacted. These are the stressors that StreamCat says are affecting it, or my local data says are affecting it. And based on that combination, here's sort of 3 management interventions that might be considered for further analysis in that area.
So I hate to make this a debate, and I'll shut up after this. When we did the healthy watersheds, we were talking about stressors, future stressors like, percent increase in population, right. Climate change, increased fire risk, those types of things that we could foresee happening in the future. This seems to be more about trying to change things that may be already baked in. So that's my issue.
Yeah, I think we're definitely we don't have that, what we call vulnerability, I think, in the Healthy Watersheds assessment. We don't have that element in it. So maybe we can continue to discuss offline, because I think we're pretty early in the process. And so I think we're really interested in getting other ideas, suggestions, input of things we could explore. We still have plenty of time in the process to explore other avenues. And so I'd love to maybe have a follow-up conversation to get some ideas that we can play with.
And then it looks like Sue has her hand raised as well.
Thanks. So just a couple of thoughts following up are, it's not clear to me how you go from, as Terry called it, this diagnostic to actually implementing. If I will say from the non-point source perspective, suites of implementation management practices are always necessary and the best. I want to dissuade anyone from a silver bullet to solve a problem. And I'd encourage you to maybe meet with NRCS California. Hui Dang is the conservation planning specialist, and their job is to go out and work with people who manage a lot of these lands to figure out how to address things. Granted, it's voluntary, but it'll give real insights into what people do, what they can afford, that sort of thing. And one thing I'm also noting is that in the EPA's non-point source watershed management plans, watershed-based plans, you need to look at other partners in the watershed. Whether you've got for example, a drinking water utility. Drinking waters have to do watershed assessments and watershed protection to protect their water supply. So you'd want to make sure that they're incorporated into something like this. If, as Terry mentioned, LID, if you've got utilities or others, the goal is to incorporate all these things and to engage your stakeholders instead of just coming up with a list of what people should do. And then I'll just add with a final thought that when I looked at the survey, my first reaction that I'm sure you don't want is to condemn certain land uses. And I just want to encourage you to be very careful how you present these so that it doesn't come across as condemning the use of ag as a land use, because that will not be a good starter to helping get those land users and producers to implement these things. If we can identify funding and mechanisms, which is really what the non-point source program for the state does, is try to help them implement these things. I think it's a great start, and I'm wondering if you're going to talk to the TMDL roundtable to just kind of go through this. So if they're the ones who are writing the implementation plans, does this capture what they would write in an implementation plan?
Yeah, so there's a whole bunch of questions and comments embedded in there, and maybe we can talk offline. But just a couple of things at the high level is, and again, we talked a little bit at this at the onset that this is not intended to replace sort of on the ground. We know there's a lot of on the ground development of watershed management plans, a lot of stakeholder engagement and involvement. This is not intended to take the place of that, nor is it intended, to sort of replicate in a sense. We do have this opportunity piece that we talked about at the beginning, where part of the process that we built in, we didn't talk about it today because we're not as far along on it, is the consolidation of local plans, whether they be IRWMs or NCCPs or things like that. So that's part of the overall framework. Again, we didn't focus on it today. It was more in the overview that we gave at the beginning. And so definitely we want to incorporate all of the work that's been done in those as part of the opportunity piece of this. But it's for this particular project and this particular tool we're developing, it's really intended to be sort of more at the high level screening type of level, and is not intended to be sort of the on the ground hard work of working with the stakeholders and figuring out what's practical, what's not practical, what's acceptable. It's really just that sort of high level starting point as a screening tool, and could lead to additional discussions. So that's just important to keep in mind what the goal of this is relative to all the other things that are going on the landscape. But definitely, interaction, talking with the TMDL roundtable or other groups that might have additional perspectives on things that we could incorporate in this to make it useful. Again, useful from sort of this big, broad level sort of screening. Or if there's things that people say, you know what, don't waste your time on that. It's not really useful. Nobody's ever going to use this for anything. It's not worth the effort to build that piece out. Then that's what we want to hear too. If it's not useful, we can focus on other things, like maybe bringing in some of the environmental justice issues that we talked about at the beginning. So definitely, we'd love the feedback if there's either other groups we should talk to or parts that you think are really not worth investing, this much effort in, and maybe we redirect our energy in other places. And we can I'm happy to have some of those conversations offline in the interest of time.
Yeah, so hi everyone, this is Anna. So the only thing I would add really is that we're so excited about, we being the Healthy Watersheds Partnership, and Ali and I are really excited about working with you guys and nesting the results into the landscape assessment dashboard, because the objective there is similar in that we're trying to provide a resource for the on the ground folks to help inform their decisions, not prescribe what their decisions should be. So we're super excited about working with you and continuing on with next steps.
Super. Great. And so I'll just have closing slides, and then we should have, if there's time for additional discussion or follow-up, we can have that as well. But yeah, just to reiterate, we're very early in the process still. We still have a year and a half of work to do on this or so. So our next steps, as Haley talked about, are to continue the development of the condition scores, building in CRAM, and thinking of ways to integrate. And we'll definitely explore some of the fuzzy logic suggestions that Elijah brought forward. Continue to refine. We did the survey. We have a lot of work left to do on refining the stressor management relationships. Yeah, we also want to play with ways to consider spatial dependencies, as I talked about earlier in the presentation. But again, we're interested. Love to have. We'll show you. I'll provide the emails at the end. I'd love to have follow-up conversations if you think we're going down a path that is not going to provide sort of a useful product, and we still have time to redirect. So we'd love to explore those ideas or other groups that we can coordinate with to make sure that what we build into this does result in something that provides a useful output in terms of what Anna was talking about in terms of the statewide dashboard. And we're anticipating working together with Anna and others on the dashboard to help visualize the results. And then the last piece, again, to remind folks, as we talked about, we haven't started to work yet on the process to build in the opportunities based on the local consideration. So again, just to show you the example from earlier, this is the example in the San Juan where we're building in some of the analysis that's been done through the local NCCP to help prioritize areas. I showed you earlier the example from the Cal Enviro screen data set that we hope to bring in as well. So again, as we said, we have these are our pilot, these are the study watersheds that we have we have 6 study watersheds in the Central Coast and South Coast region. So these are the areas that we're going to be sort of test driving the tool in as we develop it. This is what was written in our grant application, but we would love to work with you on refining some of the issues we talked about today. We'd love to see if there's additional case studies or trial applications that we could partner with beyond the 6 study watersheds that we already have in the project. And we hope to work with the group on co-development of the data visualization tools. So that's, and we're definitely happy to come back and have more discussion at subsequent meetings. So with that, these are all of our emails. And so we would love to hear from you if you want to have follow-up discussions or additional data sets or groups that we should explore as we continue down the development process. So that's all we have, Anna.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. If you can stop sharing, we will. And we got right on time. You guys are awesome. So let me just begin sharing. We close. Great. Yeah. So we had a really great discussion today. And like I mentioned before, we're super excited about working with SQUIRP to bring this project forward and collaborate however we can. And like you mentioned, we'll also look forward to updates as things progress in 2021 and beyond. And I have on the slide here the meetings for 2021. And so I will be, like Ali mentioned, she'll be out for the first part of the year. So you'll be stuck with me and whoever else wants to come chat with us. So I'll be sending out calendar invitations and agendas through the Healthy Watersheds Partnership listserv. And so if you aren't currently on that and want to stay informed, definitely head to our website and join, and I can add a direct link in the chat once we're done here. And the meetings will be, we'll hold them for 9 to 12 and then adjust depending on content. So yeah, we're super excited about what's happening in the partnership. And, we had, I think at the peak, we had almost 90 attendees today. So that's great to see everyone engaged and participating and continuing these conversations. And with that, I think we can adjourn unless anyone has any last minute updates that they wanted to give or questions that are burning deep inside. Otherwise, we'll adjourn.
Great. And then as I said, Anna, I've got a comment in the chat. feel free to contact us offline. We'd love to continue the discussion in more detail. So
yeah, and I'll be posting the link to the slides so folks can view the slides after the meeting as well. So if you really want to zoom in on those tables and take a deeper dive, you'll be able to do that. Okay, and Ali says, you know, she's with us all in spirit, but her internet is choppy, and wishes everyone, you know, happy holidays and a safe new year. So thanks, everyone.
all right, thank you.
Take care.
Thanks, everybody. This has been great.
Thanks, Eric.
Thanks.